wrestling fans, and welcome to another edition of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight podcast. We are the only podcast that brings you back 30 years with some really cool clips and great reminiscing about wrestling from 30 years ago. The Pro Wrestling Spotlight covered all the news stories back in the day with breaking developments that happened in real time. And now we get to relive those moments right here on this podcast. And joining me, as always, the renowned pro wrestling journalist, former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and so many other landmark wrestling magazines, direct from New York, Mr. Bob Smith. Bob, how are you doing today? And happy belated Thanksgiving. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving.
Oh, it was quite the turkey day, and I sit here burnt out and crispy and had my own share of travails of late, but this is the time of the week where we get to sit down and have some fun talking about wrestling.
Exactly.
So I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be with you and Marsh.
Yes, the old days coming back to life today. And let's say hello to Marsh, our creative director and producer of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Marsh, how you doing?
Hey,
It's Ed McMahon, ladies and gentlemen.
What excitement from Marsh today.
Yeah. Hey, how are you?
Yeah. As I was off stream, a bunch of my audio equipment started malfunctioning, and I was like, I got to get this up and running. So hopefully I got it right on time.
Good to see you. I love the shirt. I know what that one is, actually.
Yeah, we've been having so many cactus clips. I had to pull it out.
Yeah, well, that's one of my favorites. I never forget when he first came out with that shirt because he did it himself, and I loved it, and people loved it. And it's still one of the best wrestling T-shirts I think I've ever seen.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's so good. It's solid. It's a perfect shirt.
Yeah, so what's shaking in your life? Anything cool?
Just the same old, same old. Been doing all that recording with Medusa lately, and that's been a lot of fun. So
she's keeping you busy, isn't she?
Yes, very busy. So that's been cool, though. Being able to start talking wrestling with her was the trick, but we're there and we're doing it, and so it's been a lot of excitement.
Oh, good. Yeah. She's not as calm as me, is she?
No, definitely. Which is fun. I mean, because this is as excited as I get. This is my excitable. So it's really fun because her energy level's so high.
That's why you're a great guest for a party, aren't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mosey on in and I sneak out the back.
That's kind of the way to be sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm not trying to rock.
Hey, listen, you do a great job at what you do, and I'm sure that there'll be during this holiday season that we're now knee deep into, that there'll be lots of jovial partying that you'll be doing with all your buddies there in Arizona.
Well, it's been good, and going out to San Diego to see my grandmother and my family is really cool. So,
the holiday season is upon us. So, and now we're gonna kind of go back once we get this soiree started, really, to the day after Christmas of 1992. So we'll have a lot of fun with that. But we have some good stuff to talk about. Marsh, thank you as always. If we make any mistakes, if we are screwing up, if you need to correct us, you know where to find us.
Yes, if I pass out here, will you contact my next of kin or call an ambulance if you would?
Yeah. Put a little smelling salt under your nose real quick. We'll get you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Marsh. Our friend Marsh, and I'm so happy he's with us. We were talking about him before, kind of talking to him before we pushed record for today about how great that YouTube show is, that video element for this. Yeah.
Yes. For those of you listening who haven't taken a gander at what's going on YouTube, I am so impressed with the gussied up special event that our little podcast now is becoming on YouTube. And I'm so appreciative because you know what? It's a whole new vibe, a whole new feel, tremendous graphics, stuff that will happen on your screen that you will not expect until you see it. Mm-hmm. I think it's the best way to put it, right?
Yeah, and even some of the specials that we do, like that first shoot interview that Davey Boy Smith did back in 1992, it's now up on YouTube with great visual effects that Marsh came up with throughout it, including just you got to see it to watch it. I mean, there's just he put a lot of work into it. It's visually pleasing, and the audio with that complete interview is really something that fans should give a listen. That's at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Pro Wrestling Spotlight. And as always, we want to thank our patrons, of course. as we wind down to the last month of the year, we really want to say thank you again to the patrons. And if you're interested in getting the complete archives of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight and all kinds of content, just go to patreon.com/John Arezzi. $5 a month gets you in the door. And everybody who has become a patron this year, last year, since we've been actually started the Patreon page in September of 2021, the consistency of the people that remain with us is very heartwarming. So I want to thank you again. Patreon.com/John Arezzi. So, Bob, we're going back in time, the day after Christmas, 1992.
Yes, and this is another one of your, how do we put this? A cobbled together show? Is that proper?
It's kind of like a year end in review type of thing, because 1992 was such a just a newsworthy year in pro wrestling, not for the good things, but for the bad things that were going on. So, I always, at the end of each year, always took the last 2 weeks of the year off. Because that's just kind of what I do. I mean, I shut it down for the last 2 weeks each year. 30 years ago, that's what I did. So we would record shows, best ofs, look backs of what we've done. And that's kind of what last week's show and this week's show is all about. It may be redundant for some who have heard every single show, but especially 1992 was so newsworthy that we wanted to take a look back. And this episode, we feature kind of a wrestling expert to do that with.
Well, let's speak, before we get into the clips, let's speak of 92, because it was a year transition for me, particularly because I knew I was leaving PWI at that point. I hadn't quit yet, but I was looking. I had to get out of there, and it was one of the great heartbreaks of my professional career, because when I was there, I honestly thought I was there for life. Back then, at least the magazine business was thriving, but our sales were down, and they sold the company, or Stanley Weston sold to Kappa Publishing in Pennsylvania. And you got to remember, folks, if you can believe this was pre-internet, pre-email. I couldn't submit files instantly like you could do now. You had to be in the office to do the work, and they were moving the office to another state. I wasn't going to go. So, regardless of what kind of offer I was making, there's no way I could go, because I owned property near the PWI offices at that point, and I was stuck there. I had to stay. So it was transitional then, but also my mind back then was how messed up the wrestling business was at this point when this show came out, because you had all the controversy all year with the WWF. On top of it, failing TV ratings and horrible live attendance. John, you know better than anybody what was going on then.
Yeah, it was a tumultuous year, and everything was bad. There weren't a lot of bright spots in 1992. And personally, for me, it started off with beginning a show on WEVD, which was a big expense because I was partners with Vince Russo at the time, in the beginning of 1992. And that was a 3-month short-lived partnership, really. The sex scandals, we kicked off the show, which we'll, highlight today a little bit with some of the stuff that was just going on in the business, steroids, the sex stuff, a Russo breakup, me losing EVD, going back to NYG. It wasn't a good year. It wasn't a good year for the business, me personally, and you were going through your own personal stuff.
You didn't even know what I was going through at that point. I kept
had no idea.
No, I kept it on the QT. I wasn't about to announce or broadcast it to anybody else.
Yeah.
I thought it would have been unprofessional.
Yeah.
So I in fact, to this day, I still do. I could, I could be like everybody else in the world and talk about, hey, back in 91 at the office, this louse said this to me, or this was bad. Or I am not going to be that guy. I'm not that guy. Anybody who looks for me for juicy inside tales of rancor at PWI can look to somebody else, because that's not what I'm going to do here.
Yeah.
I've never done it. I never will do it. That was that was between the people at the company, and I had a good time there.
You try to remember
I'm boring.
Yeah. You try to remember the good things.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't all sweetness and light there. No job is. But
no
you know what? Overall, I'm proud of what I did there. And I think they liked my work. And I think the people who bought the magazines liked the work. So that's what counts. That's what the whole thing is about. entertaining other people. And that was your role too, John. You wanted to get your show out to as many ears as you could find, but you were hopping around like a frog on a skillet because you kept moving from station to station in 92.
Yeah, it was like EVD and back to NYG, and so that was a big transition, and then also that change came NYG. We had a convention we were doing in 92, so it was just a nutty year. It was kind of one of those years where you look at it and say, why am I doing this? But the one thing about me, it was I was always kind of optimistic until I couldn't take anymore. And I felt that 93, once we turned the page on 92, 93 was going to be a better year. And it certainly does become one. 1993 is going to be a way different atmosphere with guests and events and AAA and Southeast Asia and going back to EVD. And so it's going to be a pretty interesting year. And as I was telling you and Marsh before we went on the air, I looked at all the radio shows in the archives, and I see from January 3rd, 1993, right through August. I mean, it was just every single week was the show, and I even broadcast from Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So there's gonna be some good stuff coming up once we get into 1993.
And here's the amazing part, John, about your year. You just did a great job talking about what you went through. But the shows were groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. And we have one of those shows now with like 80 people in the studio and 4 people on the phone and breaking all the news of the day. You were like, you were a journalist. I didn't know if you set out when you first did the show to become a journalist, right? In your earliest incarnation as a radio talk show host. But that was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. You couldn't ignore it. And you had a way with people that you got them to open up. And it was more than that. You did some of your best work in 92. The Davey Boy Smith interview. Around now.
Yeah. That was, that evolution really was not something I never thought starting it in 89 would be anything of what it became. I wanted it to be a promotional vehicle for wrestling. I wanted to do giveaways. I wanted to have great guests on. But the evolution into a kind of a shoot show started slowly initially and got extreme in 91 in a way when Zaharian trial started and all of that stuff started to happen, and the McMahon press conference, and then Muchnick getting involved, and then me meeting Russo, and then 92 was this explosion of just scandal after scandal after scandal, and it did turn into this this journalistic approach more than anything else. You still try to have fun with it, but most of the fun was not happening. But you do have, the Cactus Jacks and the Paulies and some of the other entertaining guests that we have.
And unexpected things like the amazing Tom Zink appearance. I mean, to me, that's my personal favorite because he really let you see who he was. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, Tom Zink to me was tier 2 underneath the biggest stars of wrestling. But once I heard him talk, I wanted to see more of him. And I remember going back to look at the match he had with Brian Pillman. That was such a great match. He was an interesting fella, and I wish he had been given more of a shot. I never would have known that if I hadn't heard that interview that you did with him. So, he was a really, really talented person. He really was.
Yeah. And there's a lot more of that stuff to come. But yeah, this one is kind of a, I couldn't be there at the studio. It was December 26th. I had the appearance at the Farmingdale Lanes and the Comac Lanes with Neidhart and Bulldog. So this is kind of a pre-recorded, it was a pre-recorded show.
Mm-hmm. And like with all of our shows, who's the first appearance on the show but Don Laible, the walking wrestling encyclopedia, the guy who was also the Bug.
Yes.
The guy whose first interview in a wrestling magazine was Silvano Souza, and a magazine that I happened to own back in the day. And I love that piece. I just love that piece. Everything about that piece. Scream 1970. So Don's been there and back and has a few tales of his own, right, John?
Yes, he has a news capsule, and he certainly is somebody that was just so thorough covering the news back then too. So another Donnie Laible news capsule, or time capsule as you've penned it, Bob. so graciously is going to entertain our listeners.
He's got some stuff about a place I worked at back then too. So let's hear Don.
Now it's time to go to our ace reporter, upstate New York, the incomparable Don Laible. Donnie, happy holidays to you.
Same to you, John, and to all the listeners, and a good morning. World Championship Wrestling presents its final pay-per-view show of 1992 this coming Monday evening live from Atlanta's Omni Arena. In the main event, Ravishing Rick Rude puts his United States title on the line opposite WCW heavyweight champ Ron Simmons. And despite rumors going around of an impending exit from WCW by Dusty Rhodes, those reports appear premature at best. It's believed that when Big Dust's contract expires next month, he will remain on an administrative booking committee with Jim Ross, Greg Gagne, Bill Dundee, Mike Graham, and Larry Zbyszko. And, of course, Cowboy Bill Watts will head the committee. Paulie Dangerously was selected as Manager of the Year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. And a programming note, WCW's first Clash of Champions televised show on TBS will be January 13th, with the main event being an 8-man Thunderdome cage match. Kerry Von Erich returned to the Global Wrestling Federation for a cage match in Dallas' Sportatorium with Black Bart, and the result is somewhat surprising. As Kerry was attempting to exit the cage, Bart's manager, Skandar Akbar, at ringside, he slammed the door in Kerry's face, causing him to be pinned. And Rod Price remains the Global Wrestling Federation North American heavyweight champion. From the Where Are They Now department, Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. is touring Japan for the Now promotion along with Manny Fernandez. Wahoo McDaniel is taking bookings throughout the Carolinas, and David Sammartino will be returning to the ring after a 15-month absence on January 30th for promoter Steve Taylor in Pensacola, New Jersey, to take on Ivan Koloff in a chain match. And finally, from the scrapbook files of 1978, 14 years ago this week in pro wrestling, it was Moose Sholak winning over Blackjack Lanza by disqualification in Milwaukee. United States champion Playboy Buddy Rose successfully defended his title by pinning Jimmy Snooker in San Francisco's Cow Palace. And the winner of the 22-man Battle Royal in Houston, Texas, was Dusty Rhodes. For Pro Wrestling This Week, I'm Don Laible reporting. Happy holidays, everyone.
Okay, Don, listen, we thank you very much, and you have a happy new year. And don't forget later today, everybody, that at the Farmingdale Lanes and Comac Lanes, we'll be out there saying hello to the British Bulldog and also Jim the Anvil Neidhart.
John, one quick prediction. I guess it's pretty safe to say we're going to have a new WCW heavyweight champ.
Yeah, that's just a couple of days from now at Starrcade. I feel the same way. I really feel that Rick Rude is going to capture that title.
Good enough. Have a good show, John.
Thank you.
And that never happened, did it?
No. I didn't have to look that up. I knew.
Yeah, that was a prediction gone wrong for sure.
You know what? Rude was pretty good in WCW. They let him be himself, and it was kind of a toned-down version in terms of, the character. He was really good athletically in WCW. He had some great matches there.
Yeah, Rude is an interesting one. I mean, because of his early demise, he passed away at such a young age. But he was so good at what he did. He was so believable, and
yes,
I never forget the angles that he did with Jake the Snake and Cheryl Roberts, and it was incredible stuff. And then when he went over to WCW, he was classic, And I had the opportunity to work with him once and brought him in for the '91 convention, and he was a gentleman. He was easy to work with. But what a loss losing a guy like that at such a young age, because I imagine that he could have been he would have still kind of been relevant as a manager or something in the wrestling business today.
I got stuck on an elevator across from Madison Square Garden with him one time, but that's a whole nother ball of wax. But I will say that he's probably one of the 5 best wrestlers never to be a world champion. What do you think about him?
I agree with you. I mean, he was certainly, he had it all.
He did.
He had it all.
I don't understand why they wouldn't put a strap on a guy like that. You think back to the great matches he had. You know what?
It could be political. He could have,
Yeah, but you know what? Did he ever have a bad match? I can't think of one.
I just remember him being believable and intense and a good worker and a good mouthpiece for sure.
Oh gosh,
he generated a tremendous amount of heat with angles that he was associated and involved in, and he just had this smug way about him that was you
Remember
love to hate him.
Remember in WWE, this little spiel he did? I want all you filthy, no good
I know.
San Diego sweat hogs. Boom.
Yes. Yes. That was
Let me show you what a real man looks like.
Exactly. He
Right.
had it all. He really did. So we miss the great Rick Rude for
And
sure.
Boy, how the mighty have fallen. Here's Kerry Von Erich out of the WWE.
Yes.
Shows up in Global and takes a pinfall to Black Bart.
Yeah, well,
What happened, Kerry?
I mean, well, he had those personal demons, and he was getting arrested for drug possession, and he was on his way out, unfortunately. He wound up committing suicide just a few months later. I mean, we're going to be covering that extensively when we get into the February 20th, 1993 show with his suicide. But he was on a downward spiral that he couldn't really be rescued from, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the other point I'll make from Don's capsule, there was no other choice for Manager of the Year in 1992 but Paul E. Dangerously. There was no other choice.
Yeah.
And our magazine, we really did go by the votes. The fans would send in their coupons and let us know who they wanted. He blew away the field even with the fan vote. He was just on top of his game.
Yeah.
There was a lot of transition going on with the managers in WWF. I think Heenan was on a mic half the time at that point, and things were moving around. Paulie was in the trenches every week on WCW. He got in the ring. He did everything that you would expect a heel manager to do, and he was so doggone good at it.
He was, and he's still to this day just an incredible genius. And it's kind of ironic he wins the Manager of the Year by PWI, and then in the beginning of the year of 1993 he gets fired, which we'll be covering obviously on our January 16th 93 show, which is coming up. So all good stuff, and we certainly love the news capsules, or the time capsules as we call them, for that reason, because we could really hear the hard news stories, what was going on, and talk about this stuff right here on this show.
Isn't it amazing when we hear Donnie's capsules, how it brings back memories for both of us instantly?
It does.
Little facts and figures and stuff, where we were, and anecdotal stuff from that era. Bang. Nothing does it like Don's time capsule, I don't think.
No, he does. He does bring you back, and always a pleasure to hear that news capsule every week. It was a staple of the show for its run on terrestrial radio, commercial radio. And right after that, we usually go to spots, and we did. We talked about Rob Feinstein, who had tapes for sale for the holidays, and Terry Funk versus Eddie Gilbert, and he had that match that Sean Waltman, the Lightning Kid, was injured in that match with Bill Wilcox. So we promoted that. Rob advertised with us, and interesting to look back at it now, like a wrestling bootlegger. Bootlegger was on the air and not accepted the advertising. So anyway, but we do have a spot to talk about here today. We want to thank Curable Active for being a part of the show again. And Bob, for those of you who are going to be watching the video edition of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight, he's holding up one of their products right now, and he's holding up that
this is the pain relief dry spray.
Yes, like the Crazy Luke thumb, or the Ernie the Cat.
That's right.
Holding it up, and he put some Curable on there. And
I have this is a bowling injury. Right, it's a big knob on my thumb that becomes inflamed when I overdo it. So just today I tried this for the first time. This is called the Active Dry Spray Pain Relief. It's got camphor and menthol, and it's always inflamed. It's always red here. It's always all gnarled up. I put it on, and I am not being facetious. The red kind of vaporized. It's gone.
Yeah, I don't see any red on your thumb there at all, Bob.
No, and for me that's really great, because now I can move it without too much of a hassle. I would bend it a certain way. It would ache a little bit. Now it just feels normal. So this may be the answer to a 5-year-long problem here, because I have this mutated, ridiculous thumb from bowling. See this, fans?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So at any event, not only that, but my dog loves the curable dog treats.
The CBD treats.
The CBD treats, yeah. And she's I've only had the dog for about 10 days now, and she's ate them all up. So I got to go order some more.
Yeah, the product's good. I use it twice a day myself. Curable, that's KURIBL.com. They have a wide selection of CBD products designed to help with pain relief using the highest quality natural hemp CBD products. They partner with local farmers to source the best and unique hemp genetics in order to provide you with products high in CBD. All of their hemp is grown in the USA. It's all natural, pesticide-free, non-GMO, and they only use the highest quality hemp, resulting in the finest and purest hemp CBD products on the market today. And you could use the 20% off promo code PWS. So if you go to curable.com, use that promo code to take 20% off your order. And it's a great way to manage pain. I highly endorse it. Kurt Angle uses it. Medusa uses it. So why don't we hear what Mr. Angle has to say about this wonderful product, Curable Active.
Hello, it's Kurt Angle, 1996 gold medalist and 13-time world professional wrestling champion for Curable Active. My job for years as a top professional wrestler was to give millions of wrestling fans 5-star matches they would remember for a lifetime. But to do my job, I had to put my body on the line. Unfortunately, I'm paying the price with injuries I've had on the mat and in the pro wrestling ring. My neck, which I broke 5 times, and I just had double knee replacement surgery, so I know pain. Aches and pains are part of life. And pain sucks. You can suffer with it or manage it with all-natural Curable Active. This decision changed my life. I apply Curable Active daily to my achy areas for soothing pain relief. If Curable Active can get me through my day, there's a good chance it can help you too. Get Curable Active just like thousands of others and save 20% today. Go to curable.com, use promo code KURT20. That's KURIBL.com, code KURT20.
Curable.com, that's KURIBL.com, as Mr. Angle says, and use the promo code PWS for your PWS discount.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what, I'm on to my third product. I got to give it an endorsement. It's such good quality. Even the packaging is like first rate. It's like major league all the way. It really is.
Well, we hope that anyone out there with little aches and pains problems, chronic back, neck, ankle, knee, you'll find relief. You'll find relief. Yeah. But let's get on with the program here. And it was a look back at 1992, Bob.
It was. And there's some terrific taped guests here, including the Dean of Pro Wrestling Journalists, Dave Meltzer. And we both have had our really nice relationships with Dave over the years. And this was kind of cool to have him in this because it's kind of a year-end wrap-up, so to speak.
Yeah, from a tumultuous 1992. So Meltzer was a regular guest on Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and he was always very cooperative, and we used to love having Dave's insights on the show. And I felt with the end of the year, as it was looking back at 1992, which was one of the craziest, most scandalous periods in the history of pro wrestling, that Dave would be a good one to talk about what was going on, not only on the scandal front, but also on the other things, the in-ring things that took place. And so we were happy to have Dave on this episode.
Yeah. I mean, Dave had so many sources, and he always had the straight poop on anything that was going on, be it who won the match on Tuesday to who's signing with who to the more nefarious stuff that was going on throughout 1992. He was on top of it. And later in the show, there's a special moment too, when you have him and a bunch of other people in the studio from probably one of your most legendary shows, which was of course, the steroid. I call it the steroid show. You can call it a bunch of other things, but that was an explosive show, just off the rails. Yeah,
but in this first this clip, what we're going to talk about are some of the things that happened in 1992 with Dave Meltzer, the editor and publisher of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Let's go to that now.
very tumultuous as far as the World Wrestling Federation is concerned, beginning with the first week of January when superstar Billy Graham and Dr. D. David Schultz appeared on a tabloid television program, then appearing on a Pro Wrestling Spotlight radio show January 5th, and then in February with the allegations of sexual scandals breaking nationwide. Leading up, I guess it hasn't been a very good year for the WWF.
Well, I guess it's been a good year as far as Europe. But in the United States, yeah, I mean, it hasn't been a good year for the WWF. I mean, they saw their business really take a nosedive, and an awful lot of wrestlers left unplanned. They've had a string of real bad luck, some of which I guess, they've kind of brought on themselves, and some of which, it's been a lot of bad luck, though.
Yes, it is. Now, each and every year, you used to publish a yearbook, the Wrestling Observer Yearbook, where you went down the top stories of the year that took place previously. This year, I know you're not doing a yearbook, but of course you'll be talking about some of the top stories of the year in the Observer. What would you say were like the 5 biggest stories here in the States that took place with pro wrestling?
Well, I think that pretty much they all stemmed from the different scandals, and then the WWF finally starting to weed out steroid use. I guess Bill Watts being hired in WCW was a pretty major story. Some of the guys leaving the WWF. I'd say that that's probably the biggest stuff that happened in the United States. I think the overall decline in the business is, maybe the second or third biggest story as well. Right behind the scandals. I mean, just the fact that the WWF's business and WCW's, the television ratings, hitting record lows, the house show business going down to such a great degree. I think that those would probably be the highlight stories of the year. So it wasn't, and in that way, I mean, I guess that exemplifies it wasn't such a good year for wrestling because most of your big stories were negative.
Yeah, of course, even some on the lower end of the totem pole, you got stories that kind of got buried because of the scandals and everything else that went on, including Lex Luger leaving WCW and pretty much being inactive for the entire year. Even a guy like Ron Simmons winning the WCW World title. Those stories kind of got buried because of all the scandals that took place, and there was more focus on what happened outside the ring than inside the ring. But in the WWF first, it seems as though things, at least right now for that company, have changed. Things are not the way they used to be. Certainly the steroid problem in the business has certainly decreased. Would you agree?
Well, certainly from the WWF standpoint, it's decreased. I think overall, if you take away the WWF, it probably has decreased a little bit also. But in the WWF, I mean, the decrease is very drastic. I'd say it's been the WWF has changed tremendously. I mean, just the talent has changed just because so many had left, which created the need for so many newcomers to come in, and wrestlers who would not have been given a chance a year ago are now in the main event, some of which has been very good as far as the actual quality of the product, but it hasn't been very good as far as attendance, to these matches or television ratings.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And, of course, guys like Bret Hart, who is the current WWF champion, it is a different type of wrestler than the Hulk Hogan era, so to speak. But I think right now, and please agree with me if you feel that this is the case, that Hart, as the champion, certainly hasn't helped business any, though.
No, well, it hasn't worked thus far. Whether, long-term, we'll have to wait and see, but as far as any kind of an immediate impact, then we've got to say it hasn't done anything because, if you judge, take it from when Hart won the title to today, I mean, the crowds are the lowest that they've probably been. Oh boy, I don't even know how many years you have to go back, but certainly well before the national expansion.
Do you think this would be just a matter of time that the fans may get accustomed to this type of wrestler, at least the casual fans, can, instead of the steroid monsters that were dominating the WWF?
Well, we're not going to have the steroid monster, so they're going to get accustomed to this kind of a wrestler if they stick around. I think the problem is that WWF right now has to make a decision on what it is actually going to be, because right now, I mean, you've got one side telling you, we're going back to more serious wrestling, and then you watch the TV and you still see all of the characters, still far more character wrestlers than serious wrestlers, and so a fan who's looking for serious wrestling, the WWF, with the exception of maybe 2 matches a show, still is not it, and for the ones who are looking for the more outlandish personalities and things like that, I don't know if they, if a Bret Hart is the right champion for them. So he, by trying to appeal to two different audiences, I think he's alienating both rather than bringing them both together.
Okay.
Great observations by the Observer.
Yeah. But you know what? They stuck with Bret, and I think Bret ended up doing quite all right. Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was the right guy at the right time.
But I will say this. I remember, I think I brought this up on a previous show where I used to continually cover the Garden cards. I would just go to the shows to cover them one way or another. And I remember I can't remember the card date, but it was where Jerry Lawler, who had just joined WWE, made his debut. There was 7,800, 8,000 people in the Garden. And John, you were at the Garden every month for God knows how long. You never saw an empty seat in the house. That's a big, giant, from the 70s and 80s and the huge crowds they drew to what happened is to the early 90s, that fast. It just was jarring. It was jarring to everybody in the business.
Yeah, it just became another stop on the road. It wasn't special the way it used to be when I first started going. And believe me, it wasn't, I didn't see a sellout every time, but 8,000 people, 8,000 people. And that never happened during the time that I went to every single Garden show from end of August 71 through 77. And it just didn't happen.
No, they always had a representative crowd. And you're right. I don't want to overhype that they sold out every show, but they came close.
Oh, they came close. There was never like a half-empty Madison Square Garden.
No,
ever, not like when you have a 20,000 capacity arena. That wrestling used to draw 22,000 plus, and then an overflow at the Felt Forum, where they'd put it on the big screen because they couldn't accommodate all the fans that wanted to see it live. But then you get into the 90s, and after the scandals, and after just the wrestling was getting worn out in a lot of different ways, and they weren't drawing. But the Garden should have always been a special place. It should be always something that was kind of put on a priority list and not another stop on the road. And that's what McMahon turned it into during this time period that we're reviewing.
It was just, with the expansion, they looked on, I think, catering to the newer venues, and the regular monthly event ended in not only in the Garden, but in Boston and Philadelphia, all the East Coast spots where it was a monthly rite of passage. Everybody went to the monthly show. I got my first driver's license around 1977, and I remember driving to my first show at the Garden, couldn't wait to get there because it was the monthly thing. And the only tickets I could get were nosebleeds, but I had the time of my life. Opening match was S.D. Jones versus Butcher Vachon, and I thought I was in heaven.
There you go. No, that special time to see your first shows, especially at the Mecca of all arenas at Madison Square Garden.
That's it. It wasn't just another stop. It was the Mecca.
It was the Mecca, yeah.
Even Vince said it. The Garden will always be the Garden.
That's right. But but Junior didn't listen.
Yeah, he lives with himself, yeah.
And some things like I'll never Junior either.
Some things I'll never understand, John Arezzi. Yeah. I just won't.
That's true. But Meltzer, went on. If you want to hear the complete interview, just go to patreon.com/John Arezzi, because the complete show is up there for you to enjoy, because Meltzer then talks about Luger, Steiner Brothers, the WCW Funk, and the Bill Watts era not really working out, Kip Fry, Lawler, going back to Lawler, like you said, joining the WWF, Smoky Mountain Wrestling predictions, Bobby Eaton. So it was quite a comprehensive interview with Dave Meltzer as we reviewed 1992. And then, I always like to weigh in on predictions for the following year too, Bob, which I did on this show.
Do you remember any of them? Or
no?
You predicted. I think you predicted Rick Rude was going to win.
Well, I don't want to go back think about that one. That was not one that. Hey, listen, maybe it was kind of wishful thinking, right?
Yeah,
wishful.
You know what? He deserved. We talked about he deserved a strap, but what can I tell you?
Yeah. But we do have a number of predictions that would go into what we thought was going to happen in 1993. So why don't we play that for everybody?
What we're going to do now is I'm going to mention a few names to you, and just give us your prediction or your feeling on how they're going to affect the pro wrestling business and what 1993 holds for these people. The first name on the list, Hulk Hogan.
Oh, it's kind of interesting. I wonder if he's going to come back. If he does, it's going to be really interesting. He's in the same position in a sense. He's right now in the same position Bill Watts was in. The longer he sits out, the more of a legend he becomes. Okay. But if he comes back and doesn't draw, then you know what I mean?
Then he's finished.
Then he's finished, right. But if he never comes back, then he never didn't draw. And maybe from a standpoint, maybe you want to look at it from the perspective of Hulk Hogan, it's like, well, as long as the business is down, I'm going to sit at home. Okay? But when the business starts to make a comeback, I'm going to jump right on board that wave, and then everyone will, credit it to me. Maybe he'll take that attitude because, the worst thing, everyone says this. The worst thing that Bill Watts did was he ruined his legend by coming back, and then everyone realized that, you can't transplant 1983 ideas in 1992 and have it work.
Yeah. Ric Flair.
Ric Flair, it's going to be a real interesting year for Ric Flair. Contract expires in September. I don't know. Every year, people will always say at the beginning of the year that this last year was Ric Flair's last year as a superstar in the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, people start saying that to me in 1988. And here we are in 1992. He held the WWF title twice. And, on the surface, it goes, well, he's had his run at the top in the WWF. Now he's going to be mixed in with the rest of the guys. But somehow or other, I don't know if it's talent or he plays the game really well, but Flair always seems to wind up being a main eventer somewhere, and I just think that when the year is over, I don't know if it's in the WWF or WCW, but Flair's still going to be a major player at the end of the year.
How about Curt Hennig?
Curt Hennig's going to be, I don't think there's any doubt Curt Hennig's going to be one of the 2 or 3 biggest stars of the business next year, unless, barring an injury. He's going to be, he's going to be one of the guys the WF builds around.
Okay. Lex Luger?
It's going to be interesting. He's going to have a very different year. I think that Lex probably had the best 1992 of anyone because he got paid big money, and he basically got to sit at home rather than go on the road in front of all these empty houses. Next year he's going to have to go out there and draw. He's going to get a big push because he's making, there's too much of a commitment, a financial commitment already made to him to not push him once he comes in. So he's going to, get the big push. And it'll work as well as the business works. If the business isn't drawing, Lex Luger is not going to turn it around. If the business is drawing, he'll be the guy who steps on the top of the wave and, will look really good.
How about Sting?
Sting's in an interesting position. He's the franchise for WCW. He's going to be there the whole year, and he's going to be on top the whole year, and, that he may wind up with a world title and, at some point, too. But again, with Sting, you've got so much of a financial commitment to him. The $750,000, $800,000 a year that he's making. Which, the one thing I'll say for sure, I think we can guarantee is that unless Hogan comes back full time, that Sting next year is going to be the highest paid wrestler in the business. Yeah.
Do you see anybody on the horizon as far as making their breakthrough year in '93?
Well, right now, the one name that everyone's talking about, I think, is Scorpio in WCW. I think that if he's handled correctly, he can be a really big star. He's a little green in a lot of ways, but the potential there, he's got the potential right now to be, one of the next really big stars. I think that, I don't know. I still think that something can be done with Jushin Liger, but it's not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen, and certainly not under this regime, but I still see, that if someone had their act together and knew what to do with him, that guy would be, a phenomenal draw.
Yeah. And that brings us to the Japan situation as well. Wrestling's still thriving over in Japan. Big show coming up January 4th, the Tokyo Egg Dome. I guess you see Japanese wrestling and some of the major groups over there still prospering in '93.
Yeah, they're on quite a roll there, and I find it hard to believe that they can maintain the pace of '92, but they're not going to go down much if they go. All Japan is just a really well-run promotion. They have the main eventers are all super workers, and none of the guys that are on top are going to leave. So, as far as quality of wrestling, they'll probably be the #1 quality of wrestling promotion, at least men's promotion in the world next year. New Japan, they've got a lot of holes to fill, with Bam Bam Bigelow in the WWF and Vader in WCW. But they seem to be a really well-run promotion and always seem to have, now with the thing with Tenryu and the feud between War and New Japan, it just seems like that whenever something gets a little bit slow with New Japan, they come up with a new angle, and the new angle, means these giant houses.
Well, that's really about it as far as we've covered basically the world. Of course, Europe is another big question mark. The WWF planning on going in there, 150 dates, which can certainly burn out the area before too long. WCW is certainly looking closely at that market as well. It's going to be an interesting 1993 to say the least.
A lot of predictions there. I just that was Too Cold Scorpio we were talking about, right?
It was Too Cold Scorpio, yeah.
Yeah,
he was, one of those guys who was just getting started in WCW, and the aerial dynamics that he used in the ring, and it was a fresh new face that everyone was kind of looking at back in 1992 as a guy that really could be a major star. And of course, booking mishandling, and then, falling out of favor for whatever reason here and there. But he was somebody that you could say never really reached the heights that a lot of people predicted he would.
That's ball drop number one. But the major Bill Watts ball drop was Liger. No question about it. How do you bring one of the biggest international stars at the time into your federation and just bury him? I mean, he really buried him. I mean, to the point where he was there, but everybody forgot he was there.
Yeah, he was one of the hottest commodities. Everyone talked about him, at least on the insider, the hardcore fans. Everybody knew who he was and what a dynamic, the dynamic performer that he was in Japan, and everyone was so excited when he was coming to the States. And he was one of the hottest commodities. That's how I felt. It was like he would be great to bring into the convention in 1992, and I booked him there because I just felt that the hardcore fans already knew who he was, so he was going to be a draw, which he was, along with the others that I brought in. But he was mishandled, he was misused, he was buried, and that should have never have happened because he's such a legendary performer now. But the other predictions there that David mentioned, Hogan, of course, did sit out for a while longer, and so Hogan always was able to play things strategically. The Kurt Hennig prediction, top star, one of the two top stars in the business. Of course, that didn't really happen either. Luger, I mean, what a sweet deal he had when he left and came into the WWF, because he was going to be, in the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. And then when the scandals happened, that was the end of that. And they were still paying him because he was initially, because of a non-compete clause he had, he was going to be the kind of the centerpiece of the WBF. Mm-hmm. And then the scandals happened, and that World Bodybuilding Federation went under pretty quickly. And then Luger, of course, they gave him the gigantic push as like Mr. All-American, and it was just kind of an interesting thing with Lex.
People forget the early push as the narcissist.
Yeah, that was freaking horrible.
Right? They turned
it
on a dime. They turned it on a dime.
They turned it on a dime. The narcissist wasn't working, and all of a sudden becomes Mr. All-American. And
remember the Luger bus?
The tour bus,
yes,
red, white, and blue, and traveling around the country. Some crazy stuff.
I got to defeat that Yokozuna.
Yes, well, exactly.
He didn't. And I was shocked when he didn't.
I know.
That match had such a build, and I thought, well, here's the new.
There it is.
Coming of the new champion that's going to be around for the next 5 years. No.
Yeah. So you don't get everything right, and you make your predictions based on how you feel and what you could foresee. But so it's kind of interesting to look back at these predictions now, to kind of look back at what actually happened. And of course, people who listen to this podcast are pretty educated and pretty smart to what happened from 30 years ago. And so I think everyone out there listening to today's episode is going to find it fascinating how we kind of took a look back at 92 and then look forward into 1993. And especially with Dave on the phone, that was kind of really cool. But yeah, I mean, once again, this complete show can be heard on patreon.com/John Arezzi. We get into more advertising. I promote the Bulldog and Anvil appearance, which was really a long appearance for them. They did 2 different appearances on Long Island on the same day. That was really like afternoon and into the evening at the 2 bowling alleys that we went to.
How'd they handle it? Were they cool with it, or?
They were fine. They got paid really well.
Yeah.
The Long Island Bowling Association and picked up the fee for their appearances, and there were charity events. Both of these were raising money for I believe it was Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, or was it? No, it was. I'm sorry. Correct me. It was cerebral palsy. So these were fundraisers for cerebral palsy, and they were raising money to help that foundation. So I was on the road. I picked them up at the airport, drove with them. It was interesting because Davey boy was just huge, massive, and Neidhart was okay. I mean, he was. He was good. It was, I got along better with Davey boy than I did with Jim. Jim was just something about him, and I had problems with him later on, as we're going to cover in future episodes when he no-showed a tour I did. Anyway, a bunch of other commercials aired, LS Comics, and then we got into covering more of what happened in the beginning of the year when we talked with David Schultz and superstar Billy Graham on that very first show on WEVD, January 5th, 1992. So there were a bunch of highlights there as well. And a lot of people are like, why will you keep covering this stuff, even though it was dead and buried? It was a look back, first of all. But you have to also remember, Bob, that the feds were now on the hunt. They were all sniffing around and doing their due diligence, because they would eventually file suit and arrest Vince McMahon for illegal steroid distribution. So it was still really an interesting time for all of that.
Didn't it feel like during this whole period, like the in-between from the initial impact of these shows to the time they did arrest McMahon, you could feel something bubbling under, couldn't you? There was always that underlying rumbling of trouble.
More to come. There was more
to
come. Yeah, more to come. And it was, like I said, very, very interesting time. And then, to complete the episode, we went back and we talked about that explosive March 15th, 1992 show that was in the WEVD studios with an array of different people on the phone in the studio. CBS Evening News was there filming it. It was incredibly chaotic, and it was Russo and in the control room, and it was chaos on March 15th, 1992, the day before the Phil Donahue show. So not only was Meltzer there, Barry Orton was live in the studio, superstar Billy Graham live in the studio. We had on the phone various wrestlers, from Billy Jack Haynes to the Midgets were on there. It was just insane. And of course, Bruno Sammartino as well. And we're not going to play those clips from Billy Graham, because some of the things he said were just kind of, oh my God. I mean, the accusations, the alleged comments about Vince McMahon. I mean, you'd have to listen to the Patreon episode to hear all of that, because we're not going to play it here. And then finally, Bob, I think we have a real interesting clip with Bruno Sammartino. And then we also might play something from Barry Orton as well. So why don't we go to the Bruno clip, because this is pretty fascinating during that tumultuous broadcast from March 15th, 1992.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Arezzi. This is Eugene from 93rd Street.
How you doing, Eugene? What can we do for you?
Okay, I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Bruno Sammartino, the living legend.
He's listening.
Yes, sir. Yes, Bruno. Being that you were with the WWF for quite a number of years, when you were with the organization and when you were aware of all these different things going on, being with drug use, steroid use, homosexual activity or whatever, did you try to ever talk to Vince about this or ever make a statement or,
First of all, I went to the WWF when I first broke into the business in 1959. In 1960, I had a falling out with them. They had me blackballed all over the country, so I had to go to Canada to make a living. I was there for a year and a half. I worked out of Frank Tunney's office. Then McMahon called me himself because I had some good success in Canada, and McMahon called me to come back in New York because New York, he was in nearly bankruptcy, and that's no exaggeration. He was filing for bankruptcy. And when he heard of my success in New York, they called me, and I told them the only way I'd come back is if he gave me a match with Buddy Rogers. That's a long story, but anyway, that's what lured me to come back. And not bragging, but we turned everything around immediately. At that time, there was no such things, at least that I was aware of, as far as any of these things going on. Not at that time. These things came about that I first became aware of in the 70s. In the 70s, for example, when Mel Phillips was caught in an automobile in the parking lot, I believe it was Allentown, if we were doing a taping. I didn't catch him myself, but the two people who caught him, I know him very well. One of them is very frightened to come forward. The other one, unfortunately, has passed on. And they were shocked to even talk to the kid. The kid was like 11 years old, and the kid said, well, he says that Mal gets him in the arena for free, and he introduced him to the wrestlers, and in other words, poor kid, a lot of these poor kids, broken homes, they hung around the arenas, they wanted to meet their heroes and so forth, they had no money. It was just very sad, and these are the kids that fell into their prey. Now, when I first heard about it, I spoke to Senior about it. His reaction was more or less like, well, Bruno, he's not one of our employees. Well, I don't care. What they do is their business. I said, well, I wouldn't want some. I called them a name around my organization. The fact that, but it didn't seem to bother him. And not only that, but Junior didn't seem to be bothered. And certainly he knew about it. He had to. Everybody did. And yet, not only that, but they brought him on to bigger positions from that time on. So as time went on, and you start hearing more and more, but I was getting out in 1981. So by that time. Pardon?
I see. I understand.
See, I got out in 81 when, and that was true.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even believe Vince McMahon lying about this, especially the employment of Mel Phillips with the WWF. I mean, I can even remember watching episodes of TNT where he's performing skits with Mr. Fuji on there. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, but he was an occasional laborer. That's the whole thing.
Yeah. And Bruno, I just want to say, it's been such a pleasure over the years to watch you wrestle, and I can even remember the last time I saw you wrestle live at Shea Stadium where you fought Larry Zbyszko.
That was one of my. That was a match that's the worst conditions in the world. It was like winds would blow and rain like crazy, and we wrestled for like an hour and 15 minutes, pure, clean, scientific wrestling. What was rewarding about that? I got calls and letters from promoters around the country telling me that was one of the greatest scientific matches they'd ever seen in all the years in the business, and that was very, very flattering to me.
Okay, let's go to our next caller. And that match Bruno was talking to, of course, was against Pedro Morales. And Pedro is still with the WWF, isn't he?
I don't think so. Not anymore.
Really?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, I got asking Meltzer about Morales. I'm not sure. I don't think he's with them. But anyway. Yeah, that was the caller had asked Bruno, about that stuff. And there was just so much horrific stuff that allegedly Mel Phillips did over the years, and it was just it all came to a head like a big pimple that was about to burst. That burst on the Donahue show, and it also really started the national TV stuff was everywhere. And Bruno had done the Larry King show with McMahon and other guests, including Barry O. And Barry O was on kind of a 15 or 20 second delay on the King show, so he couldn't really even hear or respond properly. So he went off the rails in the Pro Wrestling Spotlight in the studio at WEVD, talking about that Larry King show, and that Vince was kind of flip-flopping back and forth on what the truth was on the Larry King show. So the last clip we're going to play today, Bob, goes back to March 15th, 92, in that volatile year, where we hear Barry Orton. And let's give a listen to this.
Yes, John.
Pete, you're next. Who's this?
Yes, this is Pete from Eatontown.
How are you doing, Pete?
Great, how are you?
What can we do for you?
Fantastic show.
Thank you.
Just would like to say two things. One, I have never heard the superstar this pumped up since he was on TV being managed by the Grand Wizard, man. The guy sounds like he's ready to roll.
We'll be rolling more tomorrow on Donahue, I'm sure.
I'll be watching. One comment I'd like to make, I don't know how many of the fans are familiar with the performance that Vince McMahon pulled on the WWF Slammy some years ago, singing a song called Stand Back. And all of this stuff, I keep hearing his words echoing, that he's going for the top, and along the way, a lot of men are going to drop. And that's exactly what's happening now. And I feel that a lot of people are going to take the fall for McMahon.
I think we're next.
He's going to get away with it. But I would like to hear the comments of the guests on that.
I'd just like to say that I think that you can splash around in the water all you want. But I think the only thing Vince McMahon has going for him at this point is, besides a very highly paid media department and PR department, is the fact that the people are pretty much still at this point uneducated about what is going on. But I'm going to tell you that they are not going to be uneducated very much longer. And when they become educated, man, there will be no doubt in their minds who is telling the truth and who is not. And that's when the splashing is going to stop, and that's when he's going to be going under for the third time, man, unless he comes clean like Mr. Meltzer, who seems to have a pretty damn good head on his shoulder, suggested that he should. And I find it ironic, too, that here's a guy who told, Vince McMahon told Dave Meltzer that he had told Hulk Hogan to go on Arsenio and tell the truth, which we know that's not probably the truth either. And he said he was devastated to find that Hulk Hogan had not told the whole truth. And then he turns around and does a repeat performance on Larry King and does the same thing and lies like a fool. I thought that there was a very interesting thing. It was like a Freudian slip when after he had denied knowing anything about what was going. I've never heard anything. Nobody's ever come to me. That's on and on. And then when he asked me, "Are you writing a book?" and I said, "Yes, I am." Which, thank you for the plug, Vince, because I wasn't even going to bring that up. But and then he said, "That's it. Case closed." Trying to blow it off like I'm making all this up to sell a book, which is ridiculous because of course I still have the polygraph. But then when Larry King interjected and said, "But that doesn't mean it's not true," Vince McMahon looked at Larry King and said, "Oh, no, that doesn't mean it's not true." Then again, after he had denied that this stuff goes on over and over and over, when the lady called in at the end and said, "We know that this goes on. It very well could have went on. And what are you going to do about it in the future?" He says, "Oh, yeah, that's a good question. It very well could have gone on." Vince, make up your mind, man.
Barry O, and Barry, very, very volatile in that program that we featured back in March. Now, of course, a lot of these scandals have blown over, and we're happy to see that happen, but the ongoing investigation that's now continuing and really picking up speed by the federal government, which we'll touch upon over the next few weeks here at this program, we'll let you know what's going on. It's been a real interesting time, the month of December, with people talking to the U.S. Attorney who's investigating Titan Sports and the WWF. So we will continue following this story. It has lulled for a while and it may be picking up again, and we'll just have to keep following it and let you know what's happening. But once again, the WWF, as we stated, they've done a lot since March to alleviate a lot of the problems that are in there. So we got to give credit where credit is due there.
Yeah, prolific statements there, because obviously it was starting to heat up in the U.S. Attorney looking into the WWF Titan Sports. That was kind of prolific when you're talking about what happened in the future and that federal indictment on McMahon. But all of that, even the comments that Barry O made in regard to Meltzer talking to Vince directly and Vince saying he wanted Hogan to tell the whole truth on Arsenio, and that kind of brought a lot of this on. When Hogan went on Arsenio and lied, that's what really that sparked a lot of it just put on a little fire it was like pouring a shitload of gasoline on it,
Yeah.
and it kind of exploded.
It is. It all big. If he had come on Arsenio, and he would have done better avoiding the subject.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
he was booked on the show to talk about it.
I know this,
specifically.
but I'm just saying that. Well, don't even go on the show, because I'll tell you what, he did so much damage by saying I'm not a steroid abuser and I have never done, or whatever. I quote, but it's like nobody bought it, and people who knew better went, we can't have. How many wrestlers did he enrage that day? I mean, it was crazy.
He enraged so many, and he enraged so many people. And then if he would have, after the Zaharian trial, if he would have went on Arsenio and just came clean, and McMahon would have done his very best to clean it up, I mean, who knows if the sex scandals would have even happened? Because at the end of that year of 1991, when Billy Graham and David Schultz decided to do a press tour and do a Inside Edition or whatever it was, and then came on Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and then Phil Muchnick writes this whole big column about it, and then the call comes in from a alleged victim talking about Mel Phillips, and then all of a sudden wrestlers I mean, it just kind of mushroomed. So if Hogan would have went on Arsenio and did the right thing, who knows where we could have been. But it's fascinating to look back at it, Bob. I mean, it was a crazy year. So if you want to hear the whole episode, once again, patreon.com/John Arezzi. So, I mean, that's going to about wrap up this one, Bob. I mean, let's bring Marsh back, because I think we want to talk about what the rest of the year is going to look like for us here, which we don't really know. Because obviously we're in a period right now where this episode that's airing the first week of December, we still have a few more weeks left in the year, so we're kind of thinking about what to do with the remainder of the year, and there are several options that we're contemplating, maybe bringing on some live guests, but I really in my gut feel that we should kick off the first show of 2023 covering the first show of 1993. So we'll figure out a way on what we're going to do for the rest of the year here with this podcast, and what special things we could bring you, or just kind of shut the lights off for a few weeks, which I normally do. But we will do another episode or two and figure out what we're going to do special wise, and keep you all engaged.
I know what we'll do. The next episode, I will give my tremendous recipe for a green bean casserole. How's that?
Oh, and I'll do my lasagna recipe. Maybe we should do a cook-off.
Bob and John,
a virtual cook-off. Marsh, what do you like? What do you like?
I can ref that.
Are you a cook? You can ref
yeah. For the holidays, I typically make duck, because it's just me and my girlfriend, so we just do duck.
I was lying. I can't make a sandwich. I burn boiling water. I'm telling you, I can't cook. I'm terrible. The worst.
I make the best lasagna ever. It's almost like, have you ever heard the expression? You ever hear of Quaaludes back in the 70s? I mean,
sure. Oh yeah, man, sure.
Yeah. So eating my lasagna is like a Quaalude. It just puts it's so enjoyable.
Listen to this.
In a relaxing mood. I have made multiple lasagnas at various Christmas parties over the years, and people just think that my lasagna is the best they've ever had.
Yeah,
trivia. This is a fun fact right here.
Yeah, but I don't know how to make too many other things.
Well, no, you don't. No, but every great chef has their signature dish, John.
Yeah, mine is lasagna, and I make a good pasta with clam sauce, and I don't cook a lot, but and I haven't had a Christmas party for a long time. I used to have annual parties when I owned my house in Franklin, Tennessee, and they were a who's who of country music and friends and family, and that was my Christmas every year. That was my favorite night of the year, was to throw my Christmas parties. And then things change, people move on, circles of friends scatter about, but really from the mid 2000s, 2005, 6, 2010, 11, that was every year. It was like my Christmas party was like off the chart good. It was fun.
That's awesome.
Maybe
Yeah,
I'll stay in the wrestling business. Probably not.
Now you got me hungry for lasagna. That's all I know.
Yeah.
You mentioned lasagna, it just perked right up. That just
I'm
sounds wonderful.
starving. I'm
Me too.
starving.
Yeah,
You
now
get-
I'm craving Quaaludes.
Here's some inside.
Yeah, well, that was kind of like I have to admit that I partaked in the early '80s when I was on the road with the rock and roll bands that I didn't know. You know, I experimented. Quaalude was kind of an interesting drug. I mean, it was just euphoric. But yeah, I'm not a saint, and I'm not really a sinner anymore at all. I mean, but back in the rock and roll days, you experimented. I mean, I was in the rock and roll life back then, early '80s.
That's pretty cool.
And lived to tell the tale.
And now he's shifted it all over to lasagna.
Yes, we've gone everywhere on the ending of this episode. But gentlemen, as we decide what we're going to do for the next couple of weeks here on the program, why don't you send Marsh and Bob messages via social media?
Yeah,
what's left of it?
Ideas. Yeah. So you guys give out your handles and where they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, I'm at Ref Marsh, and you can find all my links at wrestlingontherocks.com. I just wanted to throw out that you know how high energy I am all the time. So I did have a curable relaxing tea. So that might be.
Oh, nice.
And this is why I'm more calm than normal.
I'm going to have to try that tea. I haven't tried that tea yet.
No, I haven't either.
It's really good. And Bob, you said you're really good at burning water.
Mm-hmm.
That's step one of making tea.
Yeah.
It's true.
All you got to do is put a pot on a kettle on the stove or whatever, and just kind of boil the water and make your tea.
I'm the worst. I mean, I turn a Weight Watchers frozen dinner into a 3-alarm fire. I'm not there. I ain't got the touch.
That's not good.
That is definitely not good. I ain't got the touch, man. But I am still on Twitter for reasons even I don't understand. One of my favorite musician friends is leaving Twitter in a huff, and all my friends are leaving Twitter in a huff, and everybody's upset at Twitter and Elon Musk and everybody else in the world. But I'm still there. It's Bob Smith PWS, and of course, PWS stands for Pro Wrestling Spotlight.
And I'm there at John Arezzi. You can find me there, and I'm not leaving Twitter, at least as of right now. So that's really, what are you going to do? It's really turned into a bit of a shit show there, hasn't it? But
well, it's content is one thing, but security and privacy questions.
I mean, everything's wild right now. The blue check mark deal, the $8 that lasted $8 a month that lasted a couple of days, and then he took that down, is revamping that till the end of November or December. Who the hell knows what's going on there? It's kind of like seeing like this ultra rich billionaire who kind of was a genius with Tesla and SpaceX and all these wonderful things that he was doing, gets involved with Twitter for who knows why, tried to back out of the deal anyway when he first kind of got the offer accepted, and was trying to back out of it ever since. And now it seems like he's just tearing it apart limb by limb and creating this chaotic like experience on Twitter. And it's kind of like, it's such a mainstay social media outlet. But now you're looking at it and it's like, is this thing even going to be around in a couple of months? Like, what's going to happen here?
In a couple of weeks, my timeline is a jumble of stuff. I have no idea why it's there.
Fascinating to see. It's fascinating.
It is. It's like you don't know what you're going to encounter every time you log in. Marsh, you're there, right? I mean, it's like, ooh.
It's like I used to work for Apple, and sometimes you'd see people defiantly not wanting to learn technology, being forced into learning technology. That's kind of what it's like watching Elon take over Twitter. Like this is not his realm. It's kind of like putting an iPad in front of a boomer and saying, figure it out. It's a lot of mess for a while. That's what it looks like.
Isn't he looking for somebody now to run it? Isn't he kind of trying to find somebody to run it now?
Yeah, exactly.
After he fired or got rid of so many of the workforce, and now he's called meetings where he, we're taping this. Obviously, as this is happening in real time, you're going to be hearing this after the fact. But giving people a 5 o'clock deadline, whether you're going to just work your ass off and probably have to live at the place, or you get 3 months severance and you get out. So it's really, it's kind of like really cool reality TV. That I wish there was a reality TV show about what's going on behind the scenes at Twitter that's being played out in public in a way that no one could have ever imagined.
But this is what's bothering me, guys. I have met in-person friends through Twitter. I've met other musicians through Twitter. I've rekindled my friendship with John Arezzi on Twitter. Isn't that right? I think that's pretty accurate, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
And to see it messed with, and, not everybody's into politics too. I think politics has a lot to do with this. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. But the fact is, to make it some kind of a grand statement about freedom of speech is crazy. Because if you don't want people, yelling fire in a packed theater, even if it's online. You can't create that level of chaos and keep an audience that way. You just can't.
And that verified check mark is so important to legitimate journalists, celebrities, sports personalities, and to allow anyone to get a blue check mark, which they took down because there were so many impersonators that as soon as they put that $8 a month up, I mean, there were pharmaceutical companies that were being impersonated on. And so he had to pull it down. Anyway, we'll see what happens. That's kind of a fascinating thing that we're going to be following here. And whether or not Twitter remains.
Oddly enough, most of my wrestling Twitter people are still there.
Yeah.
They haven't left.
Wrestling people are there for wrestling stuff. I mean, they want the inside scoop. They want the speculation, the rumors. They want
to complain,
in real time. It's all of that, but
it's the wrestling.
I think at the end of the day, after Twitter blows up, the only people that could be left on it are wrestling fans.
Oh yeah, it'll be ours.
They're not going.
Listen,
children of the corn on social media.
In a way, it's kind of cool to have that forum where you can look at, let's say, Monday Night Raw, and then jump right on and go, they're ruining Austin Theory's career right then and there. And then 15 other people responded, and you have a movement, and you have a nice conversation. And I mean that. That's worth something.
That's what kind of it was designed for. I mean, that immediate commentary on events that are happening. And I love it because I'm on there for a baseball game when the Mets are playing. I have Twitter open. I love following stuff in real time. But all the hate and all the the political nonsense, I don't even pay attention to. But it's kind of, and I'm not really a Twitter veteran. I really just went on Twitter in 2018, at the end of 2018. So I'm still kind of a newbie if you look at it in real time.
I went on in 2012 and didn't look at it again until 2018.
Yeah.
I joined it, forgot I joined it, and then realized I had joined it 6 years later, and I logged in and it still worked. That's basically the whole story about, how I stuck with it.
Yeah, I just saw the big wrestling following on there, and I figured if I was coming back and sharing some content and historical stuff, and people remembered who I was, and that's the way it happened. But anyway, we'll continue this conversation on the next episode, gentlemen.
If Twitter's still around.
Always a pleasure to see you guys, and this will wrap up this edition of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Join our private group on Facebook. .com/John Arezzi. I'm sorry, that's the wrong plug. The private group on Facebook is facebook.com/Pro Wrestling Spotlight Podcast and Radio Show. We have a public page there that is facebook.com/Matt Memories. Private group there as well for Matt Memories. We have that YouTube channel, which I really highly recommend that you check out. youtube.com/Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Please subscribe to that channel today. And if you listen to this podcast, do me a favor and go on. If you listen on Apple, for sure, give it a 5-star review. Make give us a nice review if you can. That is always helpful for us to get more of those 5-star reviews. So that will wrap up this edition. We want to thank our Patreon executive producers, Anthony Pyrus and Joe Holloway. And that reminds me, we got to do another Zoom chat before the end of the year. So why don't we schedule a nice holiday Zoom chat as well with our friends, our patrons. So that'll be very, very cool. And don't forget to check out the other podcasts that I do. The Gibby Show each and every week, bringing on wonderful guests. We just had Vernon Wells on, which was a former New York Yankee and a longtime Toronto Blue Jay. He was one of the coolest guys I've ever spoke to. That's the Gibby Show. And now we're bringing on Bo Bichette and others. So we're following the baseball winter meetings that are coming up, the trades, the free agency. And John Gibbons is one of the most authentic guys you'll ever want to see. He just shoots straight from the hip. And the Gibby Show is kind of like Pro Wrestling Spotlight, because we're getting all of this inside information that went on in the clubhouse, in the dugout, the fights that John had with Ted Lilly, and all of this, these inside scoops on the Gibby Show, because John is letting it all out. And each guest brings up amazing inside topics on baseball. So it's kind of fascinating. And it's not all Blue Jays stuff, because we talk about, like this week, we talked about Pete Rose and whether or not he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And it's just really an entertaining show. So if you want to check out the Gibby Show anywhere you get your podcast, please do that. And then the other podcast that I do on a monthly basis is the Matt Memories from Madison Square Garden. And that is always an entertaining show to do as well, looking back at 50 years ago when I was just a teenager. I was just a kid back then. And here I am still. Matt Memories from Madison Square Gardens, co-hosted by Tim Poutre, written and researched by Richie Garcia. Until next time, when we talk more wrestling with you and more wrestling history, this is John Arezzi on behalf of Bob Smith and Marsh for the Pro Wrestling Spotlight.